In the quiet little town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, back in November of 1957, something felt off. A hardware store door was just left unlocked, swinging in the wind. And inside, a dark stain just spreading across the wooden floor. It was a scene that would kick off a story so deeply disturbing, it would literally change horror forever. But see, this story didn't start with a crime. Nope. It started decades earlier, in a house filled with this suffocating devotion and just silent boiling rage. And it makes you ask one of the most chilling questions there is.
The answer is honestly terrifying. It doesn't start with a roar. It starts with a whisper. Something simple, totally everyday. A man walks into a hardware store. A woman goes missing. And the only thing left behind is a little slip of paper, connecting a guy everyone thought was just a harmless local oddball to this unthinkable emptiness.
So on that day, Bernice Worden just vanished. Her son found the empty store, that trail of blood, and the very last receipt from the register. It was for a half-gallon of antifreeze, and it was made out to a name everyone in town knew, Ed Gein. But that name, and all the darkness that came with it, wasn't built in a day. To really get what happened in November of '57, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning.
To understand the man, you first have to meet his creator, the single most powerful and, frankly, the most terrifying figure in his entire life, his mother, Augusta. And she wasn't just his parent, she was the architect of his whole world.
Okay, so the dynamic at the heart of the Gein family was pure poison. On one side, you had Augusta. She was intimidating, super devout, and just completely dominating. On the other side, there was George, Ed's father, a quiet guy, but a heavy alcoholic who just could not hold down a job. And in Augusta's eyes, he was a total pushover.
This wasn't just some loveless marriage. It was a war zone. Augusta would actually humiliate George in public, calling him worthless. He, in turn, would get drunk and beat her, which was really the only way he could find the courage to even stand up to her. And then, after the beatings, she'd get on her knees and literally pray for God to strike him dead. This violent, hate-filled house was the world Ed and his older brother Henry were born into.
Augusta was absolutely convinced that the nearby town was, and this is her words, a sinkhole of filth. She was dead set on building a fortress, like an island, to protect her boys from all its sinful influence, and especially from the world of women she hated so much. So her solution was, well, it was drastic. In 1915, she packed up the family and moved them to this remote 155-acre farm in Plainfield. Out here in total isolation, she could become the one and only voice in her sons' lives. Their entire world was boiled down to just three things: school, chores, and home, all under her constant watchful eye. And this was the gospel Augusta preached to her boys. Every single day. This was their education. She relentlessly hammered into their heads that she, their mother, was the only pure, good woman on the entire planet. Every other woman, a sinful whore, an instrument of the devil, put on earth just to lead them to ruin. Well, you can probably guess what effect this all had on young Ed. His classmates and teachers said he was painfully shy with these really odd mannerisms. He'd just suddenly burst out laughing in the middle of class, and when they asked why, he'd say he was laughing at his own inside jokes. He had zero friends, and if he ever even tried to make one, Augusta would immediately step in and sabotage it, just to make sure his complete and total devotion was to her and her alone. But a world that isolated can't stay frozen forever, and soon the tiny population of that Gein farm would start to get even smaller as the family was stripped away, one by one, leaving Ed more and more alone with his mother. And who was the first to go? The very man Augusta prayed for God to kill. On April 1st, 1940, George Gein died of heart failure from all his years of drinking. With their dad gone, Ed's older brother Henry started to pull away. He began to question their mother's beliefs. He even started dating a divorced mom. And he got really, really concerned about Ed's obsessive, frankly unhealthy attachment to Augusta. Henry would often say bad things about Augusta to Ed, which you can imagine just infuriated his younger brother. And then, 4 years after their father died, the next tragedy struck. On a May afternoon in 1944, a fire the brothers had set to clear some brush on the property suddenly raged out of control. So get this, once the fire department left, then Ed reported that his brother was missing.
A search party found Henry's body lying face down. He wasn't burned at all, but there were bruises on his head. Now, despite all these suspicious details, the police just dismissed any idea of foul play. And just like that, Edward finally had his mother all to himself.
But this twisted victory, finally getting what he always wanted, to be alone with his mother, it was so incredibly brief. Just a year after Henry's very mysterious death, Augusta, the absolute center of his universe, had a massive stroke that left her paralyzed.
For the next year, Ed became her full-time nurse. He tended to her day and night. And what was his reward? A constant, nonstop stream of verbal abuse. She'd call him a weakling, a failure, telling him over and over that he would never amount to anything without her. This was the last, cruel chapter between mother and son.
Augusta died in December of 1945. Ed was 39 years old, and now, for the first time in his life, he was utterly and completely alone. His reaction was bizarre, but it was also so symbolic. He boarded up his mother's bedroom and her parlor, preserving them perfectly, like a shrine. But the rest of the huge farmhouse? He just let it rot, letting it fill up with mounds of trash and filth. The house became this perfect mirror for his mind. One part obsessively preserved in the past, and the rest just left to decay in total squalor.
And for 12 years after his mother's death, nobody really noticed what was going on out at that farm. To the folks in Plainfield, Ed was just the town eccentric. A quiet, shy loner who'd come into town for errands, maybe have a beer. He was odd, for sure, but people just thought, that's just old Ed. He wouldn't hurt anybody. He was basically invisible, hiding in plain sight. But after everything came out, people started remembering things, these weird comments he'd make, the tasteless jokes. A local tavern owner, a woman named Mary Hogan, had vanished a few years earlier, leaving behind nothing but a pool of blood. When people would ask what happened to her, Ed would sometimes joke, "She's staying over at my house." Everyone just brushed it off as a disturbing, gross joke. Nobody could possibly imagine the horrifying truth that was hiding right behind it.
And that brings us right back to the hardware store, doesn't it? The blood on the floor, the receipt with his name on it. We've just seen the funnel of darkness that created this man, the suffocating mother, the isolation, the deaths, the decay. We have seen how the monster began. The truly terrifying question that was just hanging there in that cold November air was, what on earth had he become?